Noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting to order. First of all, do we have any citizens who would like to express concerns?
Hi, it's Tara from West Acton, and it's not so much a concern, but a plea, request that you will write into the select board regarding the land clearing limits and see if they can put it on to their top 10. I hope that the FinCom has supported the concept in the past. This is not necessarily about taxes as much as it is about increasing value for the town. So, and that's a general comment, and looking forward in terms of FinCom's work to not just look at taxes coming in and out of town hall, but to look at things that the town could do to increase value for the town. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next on the agenda is, sorry, oh, I'm sorry, please.
Joanne Berry, town moderator. So I watched your the meeting from 2 weeks ago when you debriefed town meeting, and I was really glad that you did that. And I thought it was a good exercise for people to do. Before I get into my comments, I would like to publicly thank all of you for your service to the town. I'm not sure if everyone in TV land knows that the moderator appoints the finance committee. I'll try to make it an open and fair process, put the word out to as many places as possible. And here we go. Here is the committee who works on behalf of the voters and the town, the best interest of the town. So I wanted to make that a point. I would also remind us that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, by Winston Churchill, but I think it's a fair quote. And I did just want to reply to a couple of the points that some folks made during your discussion last time. First of all, I will be working on a guide to citizen petitions and amendments, a document that can be available through Town Hall, because there really aren't any out there. There's a few, but most of the specific things that apply to a town don't apply to us. So I think it would be a good idea for people to know, just to hopefully tighten that process up a little bit. The requirement for 10 signatures is a state requirement, so we can't do anything about that without state involvement, and people should know that. I think it's also, there was some comment about how citizen petitions are from special interests. Well, every legislator, every person who walks in that room has their special interests. And a legislator is allowed to bring an article to the legislature. If you think of it that way, it kind of makes a difference. Can we make that a better process? Probably. But if you remember that the executive select board brings their agenda to the legislature, but the legislature can also have an opportunity to add items, that puts citizen petitions in a slightly different frame. And I'd like us to keep that in mind. There's always frustration about the number of people who attend. It is a low percentage of voters. However, representative town meetings are a much lower percentage of voters, and many towns have problems getting people to run in all precincts and then to show up and be part of the quorum on nights of town meeting, and it is almost always multiple nights. We're talking 6, 8 nights. I think the sessions are normally shorter, though Milton Town Meeting this year, just a month or so ago, they have 180 members, and it took them 2 nights to do one article because 75 people needed to speak. And if you're representing people in your neighborhood, and it's something that people in your neighborhood are concerned about, you have to be afforded the opportunity as a representative. So people should keep that in mind. It's not any more representative than what we have now, because the opportunity to attend is always there. And 9 times out of 10, you may not care to use the opportunity, but that 10th time, when it's something important to you, you can go and speak and vote in your own interests. So I think that's an important thing to remember. So what, you don't go I ran into somebody today who said, oh, I didn't go Celtics game, you know. So it's like, that's okay. People should be able to decide, and I appreciated that Steve reminded us of the Town Meeting Improvement Committee, where people did want to know. And I think it is just respectful of the town meeting members to say approximately when things are going to be. We're going to do these things the first night, these things the second. I think it would be too hard to schedule things at a time certain because you don't know how long things are going to take. But that way, and I did get some calls, and Eva said I got emails, Eva got calls about wondering what night things would be taken up so that people could decide and organize themselves. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well. Con arguments on articles, information. There are legal reasons that is not included in the warrant. I can't remember the exact reasons, but I know I was in a discussion with Nina Pickering Cook one time, and she said no, because that is the official document of the select board representing their position. And if they put the opposite position in that document, it can be used in legal ways that we don't want to see, if that makes sense. But any person in this town can make a video and put it on YouTube if they have a con argument, and we would probably allow it to be ActonTV could post it with the other things. No reason not to. And hopefully, if we ever get a newspaper back, there can be some discussion in the newspaper.
Hey, just a quick follow-up on that. Mm-hmm. So I guess technically, could like the Finance Committee, for example, publish its own memo? And the Select Board obviously has their views represented by the warrant.
Right.
And if the Finance Committee felt Articles A, B, and C were the ones we wanted to expound upon, that's completely within the realm of.
I would think
Okay.
so, as far as I know, yeah. Because, you missed the part where I said you represent the interests of the voters. And if you have important things to say about different articles, then people should be able to find that information.
We did a handout once, I think it was on regionalization. And the town made the copies and put them on the tables and handed them out. So I don't think there's a bar to it.
I don't think that would not, I would approve of that, since I get to. And those were the main things. So, and I agree with people who like to hear, even though not all of us go to town meeting with the same frame of mind. Some people go to town meeting as an intellectual exercise, and some people go because something is important to them from here. And so they're not going to stand up necessarily and make that reasoned legal argument that some other people are, but their words are just as valuable and should be taken that way. You can decide how much value you want to put onto them, but the fact that this is an open democracy, it's not just for some people who think a certain way, it's for everyone. And if you're not used to working in that way, but this thing down the street from your house, whatever it is, Battery Place or dog park or whatever, you're going to speak from the heart if that's what is important to you. So I think we should remember that, and that town meeting is not always a fast and easy process. Roland?
Well, I think we got to keep in mind too, as a town, and as voters, it's the purest form of government, really. It's the only time that you get throughout the year, besides going to a select board meeting, to voice your opinion in front of the vast amount of audience and maybe sway an argument to approve something or not approve it.
Right.
We can't do that in Washington. We have representatives that are supposed to be doing that for us, but this is more of a pure form because everybody has that right as a registered voter of Acton to come to town meeting and stand up and make their voice heard.
Exactly, exactly. And then there's always the question of how many nights, how long do you go? This year, it was kind of a, is it 2, is it 3? But then when you realize how many people are going to come back for a third night, and maybe this year, we could have had the third night in a row, but you can't always, because the school has first dibs on their own facility. So maybe we'd have to wait. And I think that happened once, I don't know, quite a while ago, that we had to wait and come back a week later for the third night. And, you know, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can do it that way, but I think if you have 2 nights, people, that third night's hard to come out for that third night in a row, I think, for people, even if you want to. You got to get up the next day and go to work. So, and also on that front, if people are not going to take advantage of the family-friendly room, this is more for the television audience, then perhaps we won't make it available. And then that could be next year, maybe there's going to be something where a whole bunch of people with young children want to come. I do not know, but I'll just point out, when I was a little kid, my dad went to town meeting, my mom stayed home. When my kids were little, I went to town meeting, my husband stayed home. It's the way it works.
Yeah, just one other point that I think came up in discussion, you know, Roland talked about the purest form of democracy. I guess the debate we had was more around whether the town meeting was most representative of the town, and obviously there are the people at town meeting voting, but it was the question of what would be more appropriate for a ballot versus a town meeting vote of, you know, in between 100 to 400 or 500 people on a given night versus a ballot which could have 2,000, 2,500, you know, maybe 10% of the town versus 2% of the town. And I think that's what we had struggled with in that conversation is just turnout at town meeting is what it is. And I think the town has done what it's done. And Steve has pointed out on a couple occasions that there's been numerous committees to suggest ways to improve turnout and so on. But the ballot does seem to have a broader part of the population. And one advantage is obviously the flexibility of coming in for 10 minutes and voting and leaving rather than waiting for 3 hours or 4 or 5 or 6 hours on a given night. And then being in a group of 300 versus 3,000. And so I don't think I have a question. I'm just stating more of an obvious point of contention among the group of what is
yeah.
better. And I know you struggle with it, and I know everybody in town struggles with it.
Right,
It's just,
yeah.
are more items appropriate for a ballot measure, just to get a better view of what the population of the citizens of Acton think, rather than the second night on day 2 or day 3, if there is one, of 100, you know, best friends who come to represent an article or whatever it is, versus 1,500 who may have a completely different opinion than that group. So,
Right, that is the struggle, of course,
yeah.
so.
I had one last comment. I don't know if we thought about, again, looking at going to a Saturday, maybe splitting it up, take 2 hours off for lunch, come back. And I know one time we did have 3 nights, since I've been on finance, that the third night, I think 75 people showed up, and it was done in an hour and a half. It was real fast, but
Right, coming out that third night
very low
is
turnout.
just
It was
hard.
abysmal.
Whenever there have been polls or surveys of, would people want to do a weekend day, it always comes back poorly. So my question then would be, if you're not going to come on Saturday or Sunday, would you be coming? If it's not going to make a difference to you because of whatever reason you don't want to go on the weekend, then there should be a way to get that data. Like, would it make a difference? Because Concord's gone to Sunday, I don't know what time they start, and then if they need to continue, they go Monday night. Westford for years has had all day, as long as it takes on Saturday. I think they start not early, but maybe 9 o'clock or something, and go until they get done, which usually I think is about 6 hours, or historically has been. So there's different ways to do it. I am in favor of whatever people feel would bring the most representation. Doesn't matter to me.
I think it's also important to recognize that for the same reason some people don't vote, some people don't go to town meeting because they're happy with how things are. When my kids were little,
Yep.
I was really quite happy with how the town was going and didn't feel a need beyond what I was doing. I would go vote at the ballot to get representatives who I agreed with, but didn't feel a need to go to town meeting. So it's
Right.
not, we don't need to be striving for 100%.
Exactly.
Representation.
Well, and as has often been pointed out, where would we even have it if we had that many people? And it just would not be manageable as a governing body with that many people.
Sure, but just to not miss the point, we're not looking for 100%, but greater than 1% is a good thing.
I'm not sure what the right percentage is. I think people were more struggling with representation of different groups in town or whatever. But once again, when it's important to you, if you think things are going okay, then okay. But if this is more important than coming to town meeting, you're going to do this. But maybe next year, town meeting's more important than doing the other thing, depending on what's on the warrant.
We did poll people in the Town Meeting Improvement Committee about Saturday, and it came back kind of meh. And now that we've moved to the first Monday in May, which is full soccer season, I think we'd even get less of a response.
Could be, yeah. And in some towns up in the northern New England, somebody serves lunch. Or breakfast, or both, I don't know. But of course, they have people that will, the town meetings are in rooms this size, so it's completely different.
Our favorite one is friends live in a small town in New Hampshire where you have to bring your own chair to town meeting. That's how much the town can afford. Thank you. Mr. Martin, you're up.
We'll see if the screen sharing works. So, good evening. Before town meeting, especially when you all were discussing the Articles 12 and 13 about the electrical code and our accepting of the legislature's pilot offer to be able to regulate fossil fuels, you guys had a number of questions about home electrification, so I talked with Adam first and then Christie and suggested that I could present about home electrification. I'm a volunteer energy coach in town. There's an official way, there's a form you can go and request an energy coach come to your house, and the energy coaches give you ideas for how to get started with electrification of your particular home. So this is an overview of home electrification. The reason for electrifying is that electricity is the only fuel that, or the only fuel source we have that doesn't require burning something. It often does, about 70 or so percent of electricity in the Commonwealth is generated by burning something. But all the other fuel sources require that you burn something. Electricity does not. And that percentage of burning stuff is less and less over each year. Also, at this point in time where we're close to 2040 and 2050, as we get close to the dire effects of global warming, it really doesn't make any sense to install any fossil fuel anything in your home anymore. It will be obsolete before you may be required to change. And so we find that many people in town are interested in electrifying their homes. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So electricity itself is not an ultimate energy source. It is merely a way to transmit energy. The energy sources are listed here in the middle of the slide in order of use in Massachusetts. And two really up-and-coming possibilities, especially the first one, is offshore wind. We have enough offshore wind available to us off of New Bedford to easily power the entire state with electricity. And in other places, a little bit less close is deep geothermal. It's important to note that you can just, with electricity, you can change your ultimate fuel source just by filling out a form, right? You don't have to take an oil boiler out of your house and bring a gas boiler in. You just fill out a form and you can choose a different supplier and by whatever criteria you'd like, either by what they use to generate electricity or by cost or by any criteria you want. I'll also note that electricity is not more vulnerable to blackouts than any other HVAC system. All HVAC systems require electricity. So when there's a blackout, you don't have heat if you burn, even if you burn oil or gas, except for a passive wood stove. So the way people electrify their HVAC is with heat pumps. Heat pumps are becoming ubiquitous. They're everywhere. People's cars have heat pumps. Homes have heat pumps. There are heat pumps all over the place. And one of the reasons is, and the reason that electricity can be competitive, is that heat pumps average on a season to be 300% efficient, or have really a seasonal coefficient of performance of 3. The thermodynamics people get mad if I say 300% efficient. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but heat pumps are also not even. They're extremely efficient on like a 40-degree day in January, right? They could be 400% efficient or maybe even more than that. And then on a 5-degree night, they might be only 200% efficient. But seasonally, an air-sourced heat pump is about 300% efficient, which means that if you take 1 watt of electricity, you get 3 watts of heat. And you know, a regular electric baseboard is 1, right? Because all that heat that you have in an electric baseboard goes into the house. It consumes 1 watt for each watt you get in the house. And then other fuel sources that you burn stuff are all less than 1, you know, and an oil system could be between 60 and 85% efficient, so 0.6 to 0.85. Natural gas could be 0.75 to 0.95. You know, it depends. And the reason why those are competitive is that the fuels are lower cost. Electricity is competitive because it's so efficient. Again, heat pumps are all over the place. Refrigerators are heat pumps. The difference with HVAC heat pumps is they pump heat either way. They'll pump heat out of the house for air conditioning or into the house for heat. You need heat pumps designed for northern climates to work well here. If you get a heat pump that works well in the southern U.S., it will not work well here. And you'll end up using resistance heating or something below 30 degrees. Heat pumps that are designed to work here pump out heat at full capacity down to 13 below 0. Mini splits have been a revolution in heat pumps. And basically, mini splits have this mix and match a way of use. So you can have multiple kinds of indoor units. You know, as pictured in this on this slide, is a typical wall unit that you see often when someone gets a mini split. But there are other kinds of indoor units. You can get wall units, console units, which are about the size of an old-fashioned radiator, sit on the floor. You can get ceiling units, which drop down in the center of the room. You can get air handlers, which then interface with ducts. And you can get any combination of these. And the outdoor units can support like 1 to 4 indoor units. And you can just mix and match these things. You have to choose the right models to get the mixing and matching, but they're very flexible. They're easy to used that way. Mini splits are also provide very immediate and comfortable heat. They're very sophisticated in the way they handle the air inside. You'll notice that in this picture, the vanes in this particular wall unit are pointed in different places. They even will follow people in the room. They have little infrared sensors, and if you move to the left side, it'll move the heat to the left side. So if you're going to convert to electricity, or even if you're not, the first thing that everybody should do is to get an energy audit. First of all, the energy audit costs nothing here in this state, and in other states, it's minimal cost. And they'll tell you, they'll do some things for you right away, sometimes on-site, sometimes for free, or sometimes they have to come back and they'll do them for free, like some air sealing and things like that. Other things are 75% subsidized by Mass Save. And so you can get an insulation project, which, say, $2,000 insulation project, might cost the homeowner $500, and it would actually save $500 in a year in some cases. So of course, it depends on the house, and it depends on the need of insulation, but sometimes these pay for themselves in a single year or a couple years. And so even if you're keeping your own heating system, these are definitely worth it. Also, if you are going to be converting to electricity, you need the paperwork from the energy audit in order to get incentives from installing heat pumps. So it's important, and this is what the energy coaches do, is to help people consider what their strategy is. You can, a lot of people keep their old heating system, get one mini split for where they spend most of their time in their house. And that, because of the way the direct heat works with the mini split, it covers more than half of their heating just in the one room where they spend most of their time, or the one room adjacent to the kitchen or something where they spend most of their time. You can't get all the incentives in a partial solution, but sometimes it's a very convenient thing to do. There are also, you can have ducted mini splits, so you can pump through existing or new ducts in a house. You can, well, the mini splits or heat pumps cost to operate, usually slightly more than natural gas on a year statistically. On the average home, some homes it can be cheaper, but on average, running with heating with electricity will cost a little bit more than gas. Usually slightly less with oil, but it'll take a long time to pay itself off. A lot less than propane. It'll pay itself off pretty quickly. And it's less to install, and if you need to replace your boiler, this is why the strategy is there. It'll often cost less than if replacing your existing boiler or heating system. Again, it depends a lot on the circumstances. A single mini split in a partial solution kind of a thing can cost $6,000. Converting a home might average about $30,000 before incentives. And again, it's important to plan for what you might do in case you have a failure, right? Because if you have a failure and you just put in what you have now, again, it'll likely need to be replaced again before it becomes unusable, right? Before its useful life. And there's other things you can electrify in your home, especially if you have natural gas, hot water, a gas range, dryer. And if you're getting some work done, you might want to think about where you might plug in an electric car. So I've already talked a little bit about the partial solutions. This is the outdoor unit of a mini split, a medium-sized mini split. A mini split is a with one indoor unit is a point source, kind of like a wood stove. Some people are very used to that, right? I know numerous people that heat their house with a wood stove. They have one super hot room, and the rest of the heat is heated by, the rest of the house is heated by that air convecting into other parts of the house. You can do that also with a single heat pump. You can't, if you're doing a whole house replacement, the house has to be saleable. So it can't just work for your family the way you live. You have to be able to heat or cool the whole house. But if you're doing a partial solution, you can do whatever you want. And again, or if you don't care about the incentives, you can do whatever you want. Converting of a forced air system so if you already have ductwork in your house, you can just replace your furnace with an air handler, which is connected to an outdoor unit. And the existing ducts work as they always have. If you have air conditioning, the one system can do both, right? So a lot of people in town might have a gas furnace that's paired with air conditioning, both using the same ductwork. In the case of a mini split, you don't need both those systems. So there's only one system to maintain instead of two. And a heat pump's air conditioning will be, if your whole house air conditioning is more than 10 years old, a heat pump will be much less expensive to operate. One thing that's important to think about if you are doing a whole house replacement is to, as part of the contract to do that, have them take away your old stuff. Because it's really difficult to motivate someone to take away your old stuff after you've installed your new stuff. And that's especially true for making safe the old fuel, right? And you do have to worry about if you're in I should have said in the partial solution case, if you are keeping your old system, two things to watch out for, especially if it's oil. And people find that they use their heat pumps and they don't use their oil anymore, except maybe once or twice a year. The oil gets old after a while. And so if you're keeping your tank of oil for some years, and if you have water heat and you're never moving that water, heating that water, sometimes they'll discover on their first winter the pipe will freeze because they're heating their house with their heat pump and that water the pipe goes through an outside wall or something or into a garage space. This is a very common situation in New England homes. Is very, very often they have hot water heat. In a New England home, first of all, I should say every situation is different. And so there is no pattern that works for everybody's house. But a common pattern is to put mini split wall or console units on the first floor where people tend to have open first floors, right? They may not even have doors between rooms. The walk space between the living room and the kitchen and the dining room or whatever kind of rooms are on the first floor is open. They never close their doors. It's very good air circulation for having mini splits. And then for bedrooms where there's a lot of small rooms and often with closed doors, a mini split is often too much for a small bedroom. They just have too much capacity. And so in that case, putting an air handler in the attic and ducting it to the bedrooms works well. Often the amount of ductwork necessary is pretty small. Again, in a typical New England house on the second floor, 3 or 4 bedrooms along with the bathroom come together in a point in the middle of the house. And you can almost reach in the attic to where, and get ductwork into all the rooms on the second floor. So that's a really, really common pattern. Pictured here is a console unit. It's like that wall unit for a mini split. This is the kind that sits on a floor. It's roughly as big as an old-fashioned radiator. One of the things, this is not a common pattern. I just mentioned it for completion. This is a really good solution for new construction, but harder for old construction. And this is an air-to-water heat pump. And so in this case, the refrigerant never leaves the monoblock. Instead, this unit heats or cools water, and then the water is pumped into the house. This works really well for new construction because people who build houses know how to do plumbing really well, right? That's part of what they do in every house. And so plumbing, the heated, cooled water around the house is not a problem. If you're using this for an existing house and putting it in the baseboards, that works, but it cannot air condition, right? Because the air conditioning would cause condensation, and the baseboard is not designed to drain off the water. But it can heat. And so these are a little bit more, these are really common in a couple of countries, especially Japan and Northern Europe. And so they're less expensive there because they're common. And they fit the needs of certain homes. And they can do air conditioning, but they have to do air conditioning through something that looks like an indoor unit, right? So these things can have combinations of radiant panels. And if you have a house, one of the special cases is if you have radiant heating in your house, either floors or ceilings, these work wonderfully. Geothermal is water-to-water heat pump, right? You get water out of the ground, which is 55 degrees or something like that, and you extract heat or cool from it, and put it into plumbing and plumb it around your house. So it works kind of like the hydronic system that I just mentioned, except the source is the ground. These tend to be not economical for a single-family home because of the work required outside. You either have to drill wells or lay pipe horizontally in the ground. Very expensive. They do have more incentives, so you can get federal tax credits here where you can't for air-to-air heat pumps. And one of the reasons that geothermal is less enticing now is that in the past 10 years, air-sourced heat pumps have become much more efficient than they were 10 years ago. So there used to be a huge operation cost benefit. Now the seasonal performance of a geothermal system is about 400% as opposed to 300%, and you have to weigh that against tens of thousands of dollars of installing geothermal wells or geothermal pipe. These do work really well, though, for larger buildings for a couple of reasons. One is, for air source things, you need a lot of air sourced veins outside for a large building. I mean, you eventually run out of roof on a flat building, and you can't only put so many units up there, right? Also, the economics are better. That extra 300% efficient to 400% efficient makes a difference in a bigger building, and the cost of laying the pipe or drilling the wells is divided among all the units or the size of the building. Heat pumps are odd to use in some ways. I mean, in some ways you can just set and forget them, and that's in fact the easiest way. But if you're used to walking into a room and turning up the heat, and then when you leave the room, you turn it back down, that doesn't work well often with a heat pump. If I take an example of, after dinner, you go into the family room to read or watch TV, and you turn up the heat and sit down with your book or whatever, you're turning your heat up just as the outside is cooling down. And if you remember what I said before about efficiency, so during the day, you could have run your heat pump at 400% or more efficient. And now we're getting into the night where you're getting close to running it at 200% efficient. And in addition to that, when you raise the temperature up, the smarts in the heat pump say, whoa, I'm way behind here. I better work harder to heat or cool or whatever they're asking me to do. And that makes it just run less efficient. You would have cost yourself less operating cost if you just left the heat up during the day. It can make sense to turn it down a little bit at night, but then only by a few degrees. So you just have to get used to that. These units are really smart, and they really require their own controllers inside. If you get a mini split, you get a remote control, and it has all its electronics in it. This is a controller from a whole house heat pump. And they also have a gazillion settings, like an iPhone kind of thing, right? And so you have to, the settings can be set wrong, right? So you can set it so that it uses resistance heat when it wasn't, sometimes resistance heat is included in the air handler, even though modern heat pumps don't really need it. But if the settings are wrong, it'll turn it on all the time and cost you a lot of money. So you have to make sure you know that you understand the settings or that your contractor set them right. There are lots of other things that have heat pumps, right? You can get a heat pump hot water heater, which just pumps the heat in your basement into the water. They work well in unheated spaces. They don't work well if you don't have a basement, right? Because you have to put it into a heated space, and it's dumb to heat the space and then take the water out, then take the heat out of the space and put it in the water. But in the basement, they work very well, and they use about a third of the electricity of a regular electric hot water heater. Clothes dryers too, compared to an electric clothes dryer, a heat pump clothes dryer consumes about 1/3 the electricity. And the clothes dryers, they're really clever how they work. They run the air through the hot side of the heat pump, through your clothes to dry your clothes. Then they run the air through the cold side of the heat pump and condense out the water. And then they run the air back through the hot side of the heat pump and dry your clothes. And so they don't vent to the outside. They have a little drain hose that you can just hook onto the same place where your clothes washer drains. And because of that, and so not only do they take only 1/3 the electricity to run, they also don't take your nice conditioned air inside your house and blow it out through a 6-inch pipe. So they don't vent to the outside. And so all the nice warm or cool air that you do have doesn't go outside. If you have 200 amp electric service in your house, you're probably good for conversion to electricity, including having car chargers and everything, unless you have a particularly big house and a particularly high demand. You also need space in the panel for some additional circuit breakers, but they can add a sub-panel to do that. Oh, did I misspell something? Oh, sorry.
I just didn't know if it was one that
No,
was hungry.
sorry. I hate it when I do that. Also, if you're getting electrical work done, these days I would consider, while you have an electrician there, running electric lines to your garage or wherever you park your cars to plug in cars.
Question on that second bullet point. So you need 2 panel slots for each of the heat pumps, so each of the external units?
You need 2 slots, right? Because so in an American breaker panel, there's 1 slot if you're 115 volt, or 2 slots if you're 230 volt. So all heat pumps are 230 volt. You'll need 2 slots for each heat pump. So let's say in the case that I mentioned before, let's suppose you have 1 heat pump with multiple indoor units to heat your first floor. That's one double breaker. And then you have an air handler in the attic that heats and cools the second floor. That's another double breaker. Each car charger is another double breaker. So yeah, you can, that's what I just mentioned is 4.
Okay. Thank you.
And if you have 200 amp service, you likely do not need new service. You just need panel space, and they can do that with a sub panel. So they'll just put a panel next to it. Or in some cases, they'll put the panel on the other side of the house because it's just easier to do that. I just mentioned here that there's also, these days, really good set of garden tools. I should have taken a picture. But you can get, an electric lawnmower works just as well as a gas lawnmower, and costs almost the same. You don't pay a cost penalty, you don't pay a performance penalty. Things like chainsaws do not work as well as their gas counterparts, but are fairly competitively priced, and they're easy, and then you just turn them on. You don't have to, when you use them once a year, you pull the starter cord 1,000,000 times and try to figure out why it won't start. and large things like a snow blower or riding lawnmower, they also work pretty well. But if you need extra batteries, they consume so much electricity that extra batteries can be really pricey. So I think that's all I had. I'll leave this up, and I'll send the clerk or the whole, the committee a copy. There are things up here, links to the Acton's coaching program. There are links to Acton Power Choice. There are other documents here. So I'll leave that up. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Steve?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. It's very informative. I guess I have a broader question in terms of kind of how you started. I think I checked today on the ISO New England grid, and it's like 52% natural gas and 12% nuclear still. What's the cost of scaling up the renewables to replace 64% of the generation?
Well, you'll see in the news that, at least in this state, they're just beginning to run the power lines in from the offshore wind. We easily have enough offshore wind to power the state. In fact, if we go in places other than New Bedford, there's easily enough electricity for all of New England, offshore New England. There are changes that need to be made to the grid because the electricity is coming from different places. So that'll happen gradually, right? The state has requirements for renewables in any power, and they go up by a few % a year.
And the other thing is, I don't see Mike, so I'll say, I'm old enough to remember when a lot of the houses in this town were built with electric heat. A lot of them were in the 70s. And at that time, I guess we thought nuclear was going to be the answer to everything. So the pricing changed radically, making what seemed to be a great economic investment into a disaster, and most of the houses, not all of them certainly, were converted to something else over the years. What's the guarantee that we won't run into something of a similar nature?
So I'll say two things. One is I should probably have that as a pattern, because that is an ideal case for a partial conversion, right? One heat pump in the house, which would take 3/4 of the load, and is running 400% efficient instead of 100% efficient. So that's a good thing. And second is, most people analysts who've look into power and stuff, think that electricity will be the most stable way to get your power over time. And that's because it can come from multiple sources, right? So if natural gas goes up, we can use another fossil fuel for a while. We can, if we get a nuclear power plant in New England, we can take that power instead of natural gas. There's all these sources, and so the people who buy power can trade off there. So,
one more personal question, if I may. So I have this like 800 square foot cabin in New Hampshire that is unheated at the moment, but I do have a new 200 amp service. So would one mini split work off of that?
One mini split with loaf doing that. Is it insulated?
Somewhat.
Yeah, that's a really easy thing to do. And a mini split, a standalone mini split, is not that expensive. I will say too, that just for people that, because our last power contract was done kind of at peak, electric rates in Acton are going down from between 2.5 and 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour in December, I think.
Excellent. Thank you.
Jason?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on the topic of you said, on the topic of the stability of the pricing. Looking at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, it shows that the price per kilowatt hour of electricity in the last year has gone up 25%, whereas the price per therm of piped gas has gone down by 1.5%. That's extremely volatile in my mind. 25% in a year is, it's almost impossible to plan for that. Whereas going down 1.5% a year seems like a perfectly fine thing. Are you at all concerned that the more we electrify, to Steve's point, the even wilder the electric markets are going to get? I mean, 25% in a year seems outrageous. It's 0.249 to 0.305 in 1 year. So
It gets, it does go up and down, right? And even natural gas went up by, 30% at the peak of the pandemic and then back down. And electricity followed but lagged a bit. So electricity was way cheaper than gas, mid into the pandemic because the regulations delayed the increases, right? Eversource can only change its prices every 6 months. And it's different in different states. And so electricity does lag, but I've just read that analysts have said that they expect that electricity will be the most stable way to get your power, just because it can come from multiple sources. So if natural gas is the cheaper source, it will be hard to not generate a lot of electricity with natural gas. Offshore wind, right now in the nation, wind is the cheapest power source of any, Midwest wind. And so offshore wind is likely to be in that neighborhood.
it makes sense then that with the exception of a couple of towns in California and urban Hawaii, Boston and New England have the highest tax rate, highest electricity rates in the country. I'm not sure I want to get lashed to that.
Christine?
So one of the problems that, you'll see on the news about the continued increase in renewable sources of energy is just that the electrical grid can't handle all that's available and that the hookups are slow. So what's that look like as far as scaling and refurbishing the electrical grid to be able to handle the energy that could be accessible but isn't being added as quickly as we would like?
That's definitely an issue. I mention this to our state legislators every time I see them, right? Because I think that the utilities need to be incentivized to make the grid more robust, considering where we're going. But renewables tend to be more distributed than traditional power plants. And so they require fewer electric backbones to get the power around. Now, the offshore wind will require the backbones, but things like solar are inherently distributed, and so don't require the backbones. And then also things like solar will require storage, and there's lots and lots of new technologies for storage up and coming, and so those will also be distributed.
Okay. And then the only other thing I would say is I have mini splits and we use them for air conditioning. But if you have baseboard electrical heat, be careful because we froze our upstairs pipes by using our heat pump as a heat pump. And so that's not really an option if you have baseboard electric heats unless you run them concurrently. And then am I saving money?
Yeah, so that's important. I mentioned that here too, and you definitely have to be careful. So you have to decide whether you're going to jump in with 1 foot or 2 feet, right? There's no reason why you need your old system for backup if you're doing a whole house conversion. The heat pumps are really good. Modern heat pumps are really good even in very cold weather. But if you do go for a partial solution, then you want to set, let's suppose that you set your heat pumps at 65 degrees, set your old system at 60. And so whenever it gets cooler than that at the house, like when it's 10 below zero outside, the old system will run. Or even set it even closer,
So for us, nobody was upstairs except my husband, so he ran the heat pump in our bedroom. and our baseboard runs along the outer wall. And so it just froze, even though he hadn't turned our system off. He had turned the heat pump up higher. And so the pipes froze.
Right.
And the pump broke. But, so it's an interesting problem. Yeah.
I do want to point out one thing that on wind, as what happened out at Deer Island today, where the end of the blade came flying off the turbine. So they're not a panacea that, we're just going to go wind or solar. And wind, yeah, you put it out in the ocean, now you got to maintain it out in the ocean. And if one of them's down, what do? It's a hurricane, you can't go out and service it. So it becomes a little bit more logistical because they still have gear oil in them and things like that that have to be maintained, replaced, repaired, et cetera. Then, I guess you said, you got to bring the power on shore. Now you got to have a distribution somewhere on shore to take that load and then farm it out. Batteries are becoming more and more, there's a lot of research going into batteries, on not only in automotive and transportation, but also on storage for backup like that. So we want to see a lot of change in the next 20, 30 years. They're going to be just incredible, but we're not quite there yet at this point, but we're getting there.
I think I've told you, my dad's in northernmost Vermont, Canada border. They got an air source heat pump, cut their bill by 75%, and it is only on the days when the high is in the negative teens that they've had any needs, and they have a pellet stove to get them through that part. That said, they're not comfortable going on vacation over the winter, not knowing whether it will be actually supported or not. I have heard about some areas doing geothermal for a neighborhood, so connected, because then you have a little more choice about where the wells go. They're doing straight down wells. Do you know of anything like that happening around New England?
There are groups in Massachusetts that have tried to convince the gas companies to do that. Now they're just running so late that I'm a little pessimistic that they would have done it in time. What they wanted them to do is to drill wells every 100 feet down a street, down every street, and then sell the 55-degree water to everybody. And so you'd be able to do a geothermal heat pump, low operating cost, with you didn't have to make the capital investment in drilling the wells, right? You'd buy water that had 55-degree temperature in it. But now, the gas companies were so reluctant, and they'd have to be pretty quick now to do that. And in the meantime, air source heat pumps have become much more efficient. I think that is a great idea, but somebody better get going if they're going to, some company's going to do that. They better go very quickly.
And on the battery thing that Roland mentioned a little, do you know what the progress is on home batteries? Because it's great if you can get your solar power from your house, but if it's not stored, it just goes into the grid.
Right, in Massachusetts, so I'm in the process of writing also a paper on solar. I'm not done writing that paper yet, but in Massachusetts, we can sell power back to the grid at the same rate we buy it. That's called net metering. And so a battery would never pay for itself, right? Because in other states where you sell your electricity back from your solar roof at wholesale rates and buy it at retail rates, then you can save money by keeping your own electricity. Because if you give it to the grid and then take it back, then you've lost that wholesale to retail power, right? But in Massachusetts and some other states, at least right now, these laws can change anytime. We buy it back at the same price. And so there isn't a big incentive to do batteries. There are batteries available that do a really good job, especially 3 particular brands that they all have their different strengths. But, in some places in Florida, after their last summer's hurricanes, people were able to run for more than a week on just their own power.
And how does it compare to the cost of a backup generator?
It's going to be highly variable, depending on what loads you need to cover, but also a generator of a size that you can really run everything in your house is extraordinarily expensive, right? It's a
No,
big.
I just had been specifically thinking it would be great to
So
have the power on hand.
If you just want one battery, which can supply 5 to 7 kilowatts, say, that's competitive with a generator. If you wanted to supply most of your needs so you could kind of live normally, you might need 2 or 3 batteries, right? So I'll have more, I know the general numbers now, but I'll have more specific information in end of the summer, maybe.
I know with the super hot heat wave that we had with the power outage last year, friends with solar were frustrated because they were making power, but they
Yeah.
weren't getting any of it. And I would have been happy to just have enough electricity to run a room fan. That and keep the fridge cold, and I would.
And do you have solar now?
No,
So if you have solar now, there are systems that you can retrofit, right? They're not, it depends on what kind of inverters and stuff you have, but there are systems that you can add a battery to.
and to Jason's point earlier, my gas bills have been horribly painful with my gas heating lately. So I know about the 70s and the baseboard heat, but I think with anything, any sort of system, you can run into trouble, at least if you have the option of producing it at your house. If you're situated correctly and are allowed to have solar and all of that, it's a.
Right, and you can't
difference.
frack in your backyard, but you can have solar on your roof.
It's like,
So I'll tell you all, for me, since I've done this, my energy use is down 23%. And my energy cost, that's adding, I converted everything to kilowatt hours, right? And my energy cost is up 18%. But in that interval, the electric rates went up 20%. And I got a second electric car. So I got rid of one gas car and got a second electric car. So even considering the increase in electric rates and the fact that I got another electric car, so I don't buy gasoline anymore. I don't have, and no credit card charges for gasoline ever, right? So, and my bill went up, overall energy bills went up 18%. And I'm not actually, if I had added it, I didn't have any way of tracking the gasoline, right? Back in the day, if I had added the gasoline in that I used, that 18% would have gone down. That's just the cost of natural gas and electricity in my house.
and just one quick thing, and then I'll let Jason speak. I believe that we are on a contract for our electric rate being set, it's for about a 2-year term? I know we don't have to use that plan, but the default.
The last time we got a year and a half because we were pretty sure we were at a peak, right? It's hard to predict the future. And so our next one is longer. And I'm forgetting, I don't think we went a full 3 years. I think we went 2, but I would have to double check on that.
Thank you.
Would you care to weigh in on the controversy, or at least the conversation from a couple months ago about trying to put a energy storage facility in town?
So energy storage facilities are extremely safe. I know the statistics for the Tesla Megapacks. That's not the same as all brands, and Tesla's Megapacks are water-cooled. The one we're getting is air-cooled, so there are differences. But 0.001% of all Tesla Megapacks have ever failed, of any failure kind, right? So and the catastrophic failures, which has happened in a Tesla system, are unbelievably rare. And by, the equivalent fossil fuel infrastructure is unquestionably more dangerous, right? I'm not saying that there isn't any danger. I'm just saying that there's also danger of a natural gas fire in any house that has natural gas, or a gasoline fire in any car that burns gasoline, right? I believe that the dangers are actually less than with those systems by some measure, right? Depending on how the statistics you use for cars, for example, depending on whether you're per mile or per car, And a gasoline car is either 17 or 60 times more likely to burn than an electric car. So I think it's 17 times on a per mile basis and 60 times on a per car basis. So those are unbelievable numbers.
It was quite the conversation. It was not an easy sell for a town that theoretically is super all for green stuff. When you go to put in the infrastructure for it, it was not an easy conversation to have.
No, and I respect people's concerns there. This particular system was some distance from, it's hard to get too far away from a house in Acton, right? We have a lot of houses. But I believe that the dangers are very low. And there's also a number of up-and-coming storage facilities, storage technologies. The most innovative, you actually charge electrolyte, and you can store electrolyte in tanks. And the electrolyte is indeed water with something in it like iron. And so it's basically a rust electrolyte battery. There are other batteries, and you can, a very small amount of infrastructure, you can save this big tank of charged electrolyte. So it's those things are upcoming. And the system that is going in Discovery Way, and all systems now pass very rigorous standards, including, and I've seen pictures of this, right, that they drive a nail through a cell. So, and it doesn't burn. Right? If you take an older cell and you drive the nail through it, it'll puff vapor and then start to burn. That's because you short out the batteries have layers. If it's a round battery, the layers are spirals. If it's a flat battery, the layers are flat. If you drive it on a conductor through the layers, it shorts out and generates heat and eventually will burn. But the newer batteries pass a test. You can crush the batteries and they don't burn.
With that said, McManus Manor, is that going to be, are they looking at geothermal for that? Where it's a pretty big building. And I know that we were talking about a while back about needing to replace the heating and cooling on the public safety building. And what's going on with those two projects?
So I think McManus is all electric. I'm not aware of the design of the building. For all the other buildings in town, we're doing a study to try to figure, every building is different, just like every house. And so if you're doing a conversion. And so we're doing a study now to try to figure out the best ways of converting each of the town's buildings. Some of them are pretty obvious ways, some of them are not so obvious.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, we're going to discuss ALG and, sorry, 1 second, Tara.
So I think that we have to be careful about numbers that are generated by an industry to promote the industry. I think we have to be careful about large overall estimates based on bits of numbers that have evidence, like sewers, and when people are, calculating things up, and you can be really far off because the basis from which you have started, each of those has a tolerance that can be quite far off. So if we talk about the chance of a car blowing up, what are the chances it's going to blow up in your driveway? Because it's mobile and it's out on a highway when it blows up. So comparing that to a battery that's sitting right next to your house that might be the size of 2 semis, so these kinds of numbers, we got to be really careful on taking those and calculating them up into a 30,000-foot view. That's all. Thank you.
All right, ALG discussion recommendations. I believe Jason and Christine were working on something.
I didn't do a good enough job of working with Christine on this because I was out of town. But I did want to run through a couple of points and then and hand it over to Christine, but then ask the committee for their opinion on a couple of things. I believe it's fair to say that in the last at least 2 years, one of the main points of our sort of pre-gaming of ALG is to say that we, stable stakes, we don't want no operating override this year. We've asked them to keep to the 3% floor of reserves, even though we seem to argue of what the definition of reserves is. We've also said in the past that we are willing to shoulder a operating increase of 3%, because, well, with Prop 2.5, we always allow for the new growth, and therefore we've said in the past that letting the increases be around 3% was acceptable to us. I'd like us to make it very clear moving forward that operating increase of 3%, cannot be in violation of the other aspects. You can't, if you can get to 3%, but do it by going to below 3% reserve, that's violating one rule to meet another one. So I want to just drive home the fact that we do not want the operating increase 3% to be at the cost of either of the others. This is not necessarily an ALG point because they're not represented at ALG, but I do think that we wanted to make sure to give guidance to our representatives on the Minuteman School Committee that we want the per pupil operating increase to be 3% or less as well. We fully understand that any given year, our assessment can be much greater or much less than the year before, based purely on the number of students that we send, but that as a school, we would like them to try and adhere to the same guidance that we give to the municipal side and the ABRSD of trying to maintain no more than 3% operating increase. But if you look at the history of our tax increases over the last couple of years, we were consistently 3% or less. If you look from FY11 to FY20, there were no increases over 4%. There was one at 3.89. There was a couple others just barely above 3, but there was none over 4%. In the last 4 years, we've had a 4%, a 5%, and a 6% increase. The 6% increase obviously was the year that we did both the fire station and the new twin school. So while I respect that large capital projects are going to have an impact that are, by definition excluded from Prop 2.5, they should not necessarily be excluded from paying attention to how quickly we raise the taxes on the populace in town. So what I don't have an exact number for, where I'm looking for the committee to help come to consensus, is did we want to try and provide some kind of guidance over what the maximum total tax increase year over year should be capped at? If you don't have a capital big capital expense one year, then we've implicitly said 3% was our max. But if we have a 3% operating increase year over year, and then we go add another twin school or another $40 million building, we're adding another 2.5% in that 1 year, making it that much more burdensome year. So while I realize you can't stay in 3% and have large capital expenses, did we want to have some kind of policy that said, if we know we've got something coming down the pike, do we want to try and build up a little more in the reserve to try and soften the blow? Did we want to have a rolling average that said that, the overall tax increase should not be more than 3.5% in a 3-year rolling average to try and smooth out the hit to the taxpayer as things go? So, sorry, I just used a ton of words there. I know I'm supposed to be briefer, but there have been a bunch of things that we've done for the last couple of years. This year, I would like us to add on a capital component, especially in light of how it impacts the average single-family tax bill. Christine, did you want to jump in here?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so last year, we had like a little mini presentation to take to ALG that had some very specific direct recommendations. So I've been trying to update it. So this was last year, again, and it showed, based on the ALG plan, deficits going into FY '24, '25, and '26, and we presented this as we needed to change the curve, or we were not going to be solvent in a couple of years. So if you look at FY '25, it was 4 million based on their budgeting. Now FY '25 is 1.8 million. I'm sure that is a change in many factors, projected revenue, projected expenses. But I mean, honestly, the school has cut staff 2 years in a row, and staff is a 4% plus growth year over year. So, the limits are bearing out in bending that curve in a way that we've asked them to do. So this was one that we broke it down to say, of the things we actually have control over outside of Middlesex and health insurance and Minuteman, there's only a 0.64% increase available to you for FY '24, 1.16 in FY '25, and so on. This year, FY '25 still on the small side as far as fixed, but the outer years, the amount they can play with as far as what's not already spoken for, there's a little more. But I will say that I haven't gone and sort of double-checked our projections, right? We're projecting the increase on Middlesex and the health insurance trust, and it's not always going to be exactly those numbers. The Minuteman one's a little more stable because they know what they're going to ask for us, from us. But regardless, the bottom line, I will get to at the end. Now that Jason's back from his business trip, maybe we can project what the DPW facility would do to this debt chart.
Cue Dave well enough.
So that, sure. So that we can be pretty clear about, what that would look like to our debt service. This is last year's, so I would love to get those numbers in there. The bottom line is the projected revenue increase is 2.487 million according to the ALG plan. That's a 2.19% increase over last year. If they plan to use $1 million from free cash, which they typically do, that means 3.07% increase is what's available between the schools and the town, which is not terrible. It's not as bad as it was last year. And, with the information we have right now, we can go to them and say a 3.07% should keep us pretty good.
But that's before any large capital.
Capital's on the outside of this, yes.
That's
Capital is
that's-
that spreadsheet I'd love to
That
update
is
as
why
well.
I'm trying to drive home
Yes.
that we need to have a capital impacted
But it's
piece
nice,
as well.
yes, I agree. But it's also nice to be able to go to ALG at this point and say, just from looking at the numbers you've given us so far on your projected spending and our projected revenue, a 3.07% increase using $1 million in free cash is about where we need to be.
Roland?
So what we don't know, and somebody's got to know this, when is the reassessments? When are we all reassessed again? We don't have Brian here to ask that question anymore,
I miss
right?
Brian, that's what I was gonna say. Brian would know.
I know, and, and how's that going to change this picture? That's kind of one of my questions, right?
It's about spending, it doesn't matter what they assess your house at. Steve has drilled that into me.
No, I get that, but it does affect your projected revenue increase, right? Because if you reassess, everything goes up.
No, the assessment really changes how we split it up amongst the taxpayers, but it does not change the budget, which drives the tax rate. So, so a newer house than yours will get a bigger piece of the pie.
I hope so.
You may get a break.
I have had years in which my house has gone down, my taxes.
Never have. I never have.
It ends up a condo is good in some ways and bad in some ways too.
Taxes went down.
On my condo, yes.
Mine went down once in 17 and a half. The assessed rate. I was going to say the taxes have gone down. Taxes have gone.
Tax rate can vary,
But it doesn't matter.
but it doesn't matter. It's the budget that controls what goes on. One of the bigger holes we have every year, is that they do an excellent 10-year capital forecast, but it never has that key number in it. Like, what would this cost the average taxpayer? It's, yeah, there's a lot of assumptions involved, but they usually do a pretty good job of saying, this is money we can get from grants, this is money we can get from borrowing, this is money we can get from free cash. So it's certainly calculable. Now, I think we made the point last year, and the town manager agreed that there were too many things on that list for the money we were likely to have available, and something was going to have to change. But that is one thing that I think we should insist on, getting with the capital plan. So I tend to support Jason's idea of maybe saying, 3% plus, and allowing for some money that's going to be spent on capital, but that we just can't go 4 or 5% every year, funding both the operating and capital needs.
So I did
I'm
have
sorry,
a,
can I respond?
yes, of course.
I don't know why I'm asking you if I can respond.
That's why I said of course.
The 3% here, that is exclusive of the Minuteman. That's back to we don't actually have, if we tell the town and AB to only increase 3%, that's not going to cover it, right? Okay. So we don't want to take this to them.
This is the whole number. You're right. We need to go back to something along these lines that gives them how much, I actually think, did I hide it? I had a slide that had the actual number of how much was left over, but we can do that again like we did last year. Outside of Minuteman and other fixed expenses, this is the amount we have.
Yeah. And I presume this has not been updated with the new Middlesex COLA increase.
It's not in the ALG plan yet.
Yeah. And I, to Jason's point, I like the idea of looking at the overall tax impact on people. I think maybe a rolling average is better because there are years where we roll off debt.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not saying that the second debt goes away. We should be piling it back up, but there are some things we need to do that cost money. So I'm like, that sounds silly if I say it that way. So I think it's good to take that into account also. Theoretically, there could be a year when our tax went down if we paid off something really large, but we're not looking at that right now.
Close.
So my,
So actually, last year, what part of what saved the municipal side last year is that a significant amount of capital debt rolled off. It was a huge percentage of last year's, almost 1.25% of the overall increase last year.
but that was in the budget, that wasn't excluded debt, correct?
No, it was excluded debt. So it was so if you looked at the, here, let me try and pull it up. If you looked at the top sheet at one point, and I remember Steve Barrett having a hard time with it because it showed a negative number, and we all
Yes.
gave him a hard time about that. The overall taxation went up at a much lower rate than the operating budget because the amount of excluded debt rolled off.
Yes, but that doesn't help the town with the municipal operating budget operating
Doesn't help.
within 2.5 and
Doesn't
growth.
help, I'm not trying to account for.
Yeah, I'm explaining that to anyone who's listening.
Okay, I'm
to this.
trying to say that I think we've done a very good job of constraining and guiding and recommending with regards to Prop 2.5. If anything, I think we're being a little generous, saying that you can go at 3, even though Prop 2.5 is at 2.5, because we're allowing for new growth pretty much all the time. But I'm saying we now need to start making guidance on the capital side as well, so that we don't have tax increases that are like this, like the recent history of 5.3 3.5, 6.0, 4.1, just going back in the last 4 years.
Christine, can you put that in a slide?
Yes, I can put that in the slide.
And
I would,
indicate what's excluded debt versus,
yeah.
The other,
I mean, I would argue that we can make recommendations, but if the townspeople hear a presentation and they think, I'm willing to invest in this twin school, and I understand my taxes are going to go up X amount, and we add that on. And if the townspeople hear a similar presentation about the DPW building or whatever else, we can recommend that we not spike people's tax bills, but they do have the ability to not vote for those things in a way that's very much set aside from the overall operating budget. So I think making it abundantly clear exactly what tax implications those sort of projects will have is really important, but I'm not so sure that anything other than just a general recommendation.
do you think there's any value in suggesting to the taxing authorities that they plan for a very large expense that they know is 2 or 3 years out, and maybe try not to tax the max in the immediate future to try, I mean, think about,
I think that's what the 10-year capital plan is.
but we're still saying you can tax the max and spend operationally at 3%,
You can?
and that we're totally fine with keeping all capital external from it. You know, when I first started, I was told by the guy whose seat I took over that you should absolutely treat this money as if it were your own. And I don't know about you, but I definitely saved a little extra money before I bought a new car. Before we had a major capital expense, we did do some planning in advance. And I would like to see us do a little planning in advance rather than saying, oh no, 3% a year is just fine. And oh, by the way, if enough people want it at town meeting, we'll let the tax bill get spiked up 6.5%. I don't want us to do that anymore. I want us to be more proactive in what we say to the taxing authorities.
Can I? I personally haven't seen instances in either budget where there's overspending, where there's more opportunity to cut. These budgets have been pretty slim the last few years. I'm not sure where they would find enough savings to have any kind of impact, especially on something coming up just in the next couple of years. I just don't see it. If I saw gross overage, I would totally agree with you. But we look through these budgets and we certainly don't come to them and say, hey, you're clearly overspending here, here, and here. There haven't been a lot of pet projects. So in theory, I agree with you, but in reality and in looking at the financial situation of the town and the schools, I don't see where they would be able to implement that, just as there's not a lot of room in my personal budget for that sort of savings as well. It just, sometimes the facts don't add up to our wishes. And if the people are willing to, I mean, again, we can make recommendations, yes, and the capital plan is kind of that. What I want from the capital plan is what Steve suggested, which is this is exactly how this would affect our tax bill outside of the regular tax increases, so that at least it's more transparent what people are agreeing to.
I think that including the tax increases, the extra operating budget tax increases, it should stay an important part of the discussion. I was on ALG when we pushed the twin school through and frequently pointed out that this was a big change to people's bill coming from this one project. I think that should always be a part of what we are discussing at ALG. That said, I agree with Christine that I don't know where they're going to cut right now. I think the schools have cut to the bone, and I'm not concerned, especially on that side about it. Did I see a hand over here? Nope. Roland?
I think something else has to be taken into consideration too when you're talking at ALG is stabilization funds. What do we have in there? What's their plan? Are they going to be adding to stabilization over the next coming years so that when we have a bigger project, we can pull money back out of stabilization and we have some of that readily available? Or do we start using some of that we have? I know we had one sitting there for 5 years and it never got touched. So I think that's something that can be on the periphery of that, saying, what's the plan, where are you going to go with it?
Mayor's
You know, because you know you're going to have big capital projects coming down the road. What's in stabilization that we can start to use towards our capital that we need to fund and, or replenish?
I'd just like to say that we frequently use the stabilization funds as the core anchor for getting to the 3% reserves that we recommend as the floor. So if we wanted to have a conversation about if we know that something's coming in the near future and we want to pierce that to meet this capital cost in the near future, as long as there's a plan to backfill it, that would be an equally worthwhile recommendation that I'd be fine to entertain. But right now, I'm trying to make sure that we have something other than just the operating recommendations.
The last time we discussed using the stabilization fund, there was also concern about how it would affect our bond rating. And given that we're going into a period of a large loan, that is something to keep a strict eye on. I don't know who we talked to about with that soon, but hopefully that'll get settled.
May I make one other comment? I did ask Mr. Wellinghoff to tap into the latest rates, and the information that we got back is, this is all supposition on supposition, so it's definitely subject to change. But if you take today's rates more or less of 3.6, of a blended average of 3.6% over the next 30 years, and a $40 million building, we probably should have a 35, a 40, and a 45 just to sort of cover our bases of the ranges. But trying to pick something in the middle, obviously this is just an exercise. That would be $2.2 million per year in principal and interest on the project, and that is just about a 2% increase to the average single-family tax bill. So if you take a 3% operating and you add 2% to it, then we're back in our 5% range, which has been quite difficult for these last couple of years. So that's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, that we either discuss how to do this over straddling the fall off of previous debt, doing a 3-year rolling average so that we try and maintain, we try not to spike the tax bill too badly, or making sure I respect that you say we have nowhere to cut, but if you want to buy new things, you've got to be able to afford them. So therefore, maybe we have to build up in advance, or all of the above. But I just don't want to see, I don't want every capital cost to be, oh, well, we weren't totally planning on that, and now we've got a 6% this year, and next year's at a 5% as well. It escalates too darn quick for me. It compounds too darn quick for me as well.
Yeah, I think Jason captured it, but he does bring up also the general point that capital items using a debt exclusion, I mean, the rate environment, to state the obvious, is much higher. And it took a look at just what like a 30-year issuance would be now in today's market versus, for example, when the twin schools were financed 3 years ago. And that rate was very low, 2% in aggregate, and it looks like it's like close to 3.6+% or so now. So you throw, tens of millions of dollars of capital projects at the debt market, and just the cost alone of borrowing is higher. I'm stating the obvious, but I think it's something everybody should internalize when we look at these items, that we were in a really favorable rate environment for a number of years, and everything, your own home and auto purchases are much more expensive, just like it is for the town to borrow, so.
I mean, but we don't also expect the interest rates to go down anytime soon, possibly, I mean, certainly not in the foreseeable future. So this is something that I think the trade-offs are something we're going to have to sort of wrap our heads around in the meantime.
I don't know why I keep raising my hand. I would love to see this chart with numbers associated with each bar for the average single-family home, or medium, whatever it is. And I would love to see it added in with the $17 million proposed sidewalk borrowing that was in our POV. Our POV currently says that there's a $17 million project this year.
I think that's from a couple of years ago, though. It hasn't been on the capital plan for a while. I don't think they're still pursuing that.
It'd be great if someone would look at the capital plan and figure out what is currently proposed borrowing for this year scale projects with the idea that, with the recognition that the town will change things. But to see what big things are coming up, I thought it was the sidewalks and the DPW. Does anyone know what year that is projected for?
I guess theoretically could be as early as next town meeting, but realistically, it's probably 2 town meetings from now. But we'll know relatively quickly, I'm assuming.
Yeah, just one note on that. I think the comparables they used for that were inflation adjusted to 2023. So presumably any number that would be proposed at 2024 or 5 would be 5 to 8% higher, just for what it's worth. I don't want to mention this again, and I don't know if it really factors into this, but there was that state money for the water district for PFAS mitigation. There's some bigger numbers. We did, I think in the past, the select board had allocated a part of the ARPA funds for that. I don't think it was a big dollar item, but if it hasn't been spent, it might be something that could be captured by the other state funding and the town could save it.
Sorry, this is FY23. I was just looking to see if I could pull it up real quick, but.
As I said, I believe it's in our current posted POV as that for this year. Before we finalize this presentation or our message, I would love to know what we're looking at over the next few years, what the town has told us based on the SIP we're looking at over the next few years. That's clearly excluded debt borrowing. Unless someone wants to correct me that 17 million could somehow be in debt service could be added to our, okay.
No, you're right, it's still on there, but it's a little farther out.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I meant the $15 million DPW design construction for fiscal year 25.
It's not.
It's still projected, obviously. This is the plan, but not necessarily, I mean, the select board hasn't moved on any of this at this point.
I think that number's already stale. Their own document says 34.9 million pre-escalation.
But we could split that out over the 2 years. It's most helpful if we can go to them and say, here are the numbers you gave us. Here's what it's going to do. Here's where we think it works. So I love the presentation so far. I think the slides are very helpful. If we could stick an updated version of this information in.
Sure thing, absolutely.
Anyone else? Dave, you look like you have a thought. Okay, so what I'm hearing is we are not in a position to vote on this today as our final message. So, but that's okay because I don't know when the next ALG meeting is. The town manager reached out and said that they are looking to change how the model is presented, I believe, on the first page. All of the same information will be in it. They're just trying to make it be a little easier to read. They have not finalized what that is, and we'll be discussing it, and hopefully the next ALG meeting, so I'll make sure we get to, at a minimum, have a discussion about that afterwards. And I believe that's it, unless anyone has anything else to discuss here. Tara. Yes. Microphone.
So a while ago, I was on the select board, and one of the things that I did was to do an inventory of funds. And I remember Peter Ashton was really upset because John Murray had not told him about all these funds. We found like well over $1 million. I'll just give you one example. The library has $250,000 of state aid money that they've been holding on to. that you may not know about, that they have been asking for carpet and other stuff. So just please take a look at those things. Another thing that we did was we looked at things like the enterprise funds and the FTE hours that were being spent on related things could then be charged to the enterprise fund, to think in ways that are a little out of the box. Union negotiations at the time increased the share of the healthcare costs to what the market, like what other people outside the town were paying, and they bought, paid a lump sum to each person to choose the cheaper healthcare plan. And that was a great success and saved lots of money, even in the first year. Also, so to soften the blow, I'm thinking that there is like SRO-type funds for projects that the state funds. Is it possible that you can get SRO funds? It's sort of like a muni bank where the town can give money out at a lower rate, and it's very successful because the chances of a default on the property, that the town has the more ability to take the property apparently. So look into that. Land bank is a way to get money from developers for land purchases. There's already 2 towns that have done it, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. So there's enabling language on that. Look at your cash flow and your float. We found a couple $100,000 in the cash flow and the float by the end of the year. That ends up being in, I forget what it's called, the reserves or something like that. But during the year, there were positions that weren't filled, et cetera. So there was a lot of cash float that was able to be used. Also, look into perhaps some innovative taxation, impervious tax. There's supposedly a way that we can tax mansions, tax impervious surfaces to add or soften the blow to people that have less of an impact on the environment and the town. And also, there's, I have to check what the town attorney says about this, but there are municipalities that are implementing like special split commercial rates where all businesses, everybody's equal like it is now, except for really huge companies that aren't going to go anywhere like CVS because they're making millions of dollars off of the town. So you could figure out some kind of, stores that have more than 15, internationally owned corporations, public, whatever it is, you could split the rate that way. It just has to be uniform, so it's not, how do they say, capricious. So thank you very much for listening. But to look out, to expand beyond the formula of being just tax or don't tax on the budget and spend or don't spend, so expand beyond to more sort of innovative, creative ways of thinking. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, next item is liaison assignments. Adam had asked for someone to take over the select board, which, as we know, he's been doing a huge job on. I'm willing to split it with someone, but I don't want to take it on fully by myself.
I can split it with you.
Wonderful.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
This means you get assigned things.
So Dave's taking the school committee.
I don't know of any currently not covered committees. Would anyone like to have their assignment switched with someone else or shared?
I would love to not have sole responsibility for the school committee anymore.
Vlad, are you willing to help with that?
Thanks.
You guys can split up. They tend to be long meetings, but you can watch them. You don't have to attend.
I think since Adam's not here, he gets that one too.
But he did say those words.
He did.
Yeah.
In writing, yes.
All right.
So we're looking at Christine and Vlad.
Sure. Yeah.
Do we want a third for select board? We want Adam to stick with select board?
No.
No, no, no.
No, put him on school committee, add Scott to select board with us?
Sure.
Okay.
There you go.
Do you have that written down? Vlad, Christine, and Adam. And Christine, you still have Minuteman also, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I want to keep a closer eye on what's going on there.
Okay, we'll, I presume, talk about that later.
Yes.
All right? Unless someone knows of something else we should be keeping an eye on, we'll move on to our next item, minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the March 28th minutes that I sent out?
Move to approve the minutes for March 28th.
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, passes unanimously. Next up is liaison reports. I know Christine has one.
Yeah, so Minuteman is moving forward with investigation of the situation with the superintendent. We have an acting superintendent at this point, and Mr. Clement, who originally the principal's contract wasn't renewed, but he was still working for the school through the end of the school year, although he was on medical personal leave. They've now gone ahead and just severed that relationship. So he's no longer the principal at Minuteman. Mr. Chiarello, is acting as principal. He's the vice principal. And there's hopefully going to be more information. But at this point, I think that the people who have insight into how we ended up in this situation are now dealing with, legal matters and can't speak as much as everybody would like them to be able to speak. I have asked that Pam come and speak before our committee, but unfortunately, her next meeting with their school committee is the same night as our next meeting, and they've got some important things going on with their school committee right now. So as soon as I can get some answers and get her here, I will do so.
Jason?
On the school building, the twin school building, campus building committee, there was some foreshadowing that the superintendent was going to bring forward a pair of employees who did extra work during the build-out of the new twin school, and that he wanted to reward their excellent behavior. While I'm quite confident that both of those employees did do great work and are deserving of a bonus, I'm seeking the committee's approval to say that it's not appropriate to come out of a capital building plan. If you've got a pair of employees who've done good things for you in the year, you should absolutely be able to bonus incentivize them, but it should not be something that's being done at borrowed rates for the next 30 years. It should come out of the operating budget. My feel for this, the reason why I'm asking for the committee's vote on this is coming one meeting after another committee member said, well, we can just do the more expensive of the two options because the money's already appropriated. I get the distinct feeling that since we are coming in slightly under budget, looks like we're handing out the last of the dollars as the project winds down. And I don't like the precedent, and I don't like the attitude. And two employees, deserving that they may be, should not be paid out of a capital building project. It should be paid out of an operating cost.
Discussion.
Isha's shaking her head.
I tend to agree.
Roland?
Absolutely agree. It's an operating expense. It's not a capital improvement that the entities, Acton and Buffalo, have been paying for 30 years.
And I can see that they were doing extra work for the new building, but it's part of their job to handle all aspects of the district.
Steve?
No, it's entirely inappropriate to use capital funds for compensation purposes.
I agree 100%. This is an inappropriate use of borrowed.
So I will absolutely take this committee's message, but I also want to set the expectation that I suspect I will be the lone dissenting voice on this vote. But I appreciate the committee agreeing with me and letting me say that with the committee's backing.
It could be illegal, too.
Would you like a motion to this effect, and I am happy to communicate it. Also, think it's a reasonable thing to be brought up with ALG, and I'm happy to request an earlier meeting. Do you know if this would be part of this current fiscal year budget?
It has not been formally presented to us yet. It was just foreshadowing at the last meeting that it was going to be brought up at the next meeting. The next meeting's in like 10 days, 8 days.
If we have a motion, I'm happy to communicate with the superintendent.
I move to communicate to the school building committee that funds to reward employees not come out of the capital project budget.
To the school building committee, not to the superintendent? Or both?
I don't know who is it being made to.
The superintendent is the person presumably making this recommendation to the school building committee.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough,
So to both, do you want to?
both.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll write this down. We're going to give her a second to write down the motion.
I do want to, this is the discussion part, right?
Yes, I was about to say.
I definitely don't want, this to be seen as not valuing the efforts of the two employees. I'm just saying on principle that this should not come out, that this should not be part of principle, that this should be operating.
There was briefly a warrant article, I thought, to the effect of how to reassign the funds that were not used as part of the school building. And then
I
it was
wouldn't worry about
pulled.
that too much.
I'm curious if it was pulled for reasons like this, or, and secondarily, how, money that's not spent, what happens to it?
So it's important to remember that when we took out the bond, we only took out 97% of the expected cost. In the case that we ran severely under budget, we didn't want to get attacked on having windfall gains, ill-gotten gains of having made money off of a bond for something that we didn't actually buy. So we only took out a 97% bond. We're already beyond the 97% that we took out a bond on. So there is going to be a true-up amount of money that has already been authorized through the debt exclusion. We don't have the exact final number of what that's going to be, but anything that hasn't been spent cannot be reauthorized for anything else.
So you're saying that this bonus would be part of an already approved but not borrowed debt exclusion?
Depending on the timing, yes, that's entirely possible. It's part of the reason why I'm against it.
Any further discussion? Christine?
I was just curious, so have you had experience with this sort of thing, or are you just?
No, it's just like,
Supposing
Yeah.
it's possible, yeah, okay.
Well, I think the state has a list of the things you can capitalize, and people are not one of them.
Yep.
All right, let's have a vote. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, thank you very much. So I will communicate this to the superintendent ahead of the school building committee.
And I'll deliver it to the school building committee meeting at our next meeting.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Nope. Okay. Future meeting dates. Our next meeting on the calendar is for June 13th. Do we have any agenda items people would like to look at that time, apart from our continued discussion on the ALG recommendation? Okay, well, you can also get in touch with me. I post the Thursday before the meeting, so as long as I have it by then, that would be good. Any other announcements or committee business? Nope, okay. Glad, I would be happy to accept a motion.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Wonderful. Let's give Isha a second, write it down.
Got it.
All right, all in favor? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, thank you. Good night, everyone.